Wait! Let me feel it.
I didn't care that he was the most feared don in all of Italy. I didn't care that his tattooed hands had ended more lives than I had ever saved in an ER. As Cristiano Marino turned to walk away, radiating a cold, lethal energy that would have made any other woman crumble, I snapped a single word that stopped him dead. Wait. He froze, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the doorframe. I stepped into his personal space, the scent of expensive tobacco and danger swirling around me, and I looked him dead in his predatory eyes. Let me feel it, I commanded. For 3 years, the most powerful man in Milan had been a ghost in his own bed, broken by a betrayal so deep his body had literally forgotten how to be a man. He'd seen every specialist in Europe, but they all missed the one thing I saw. I took a bold step closer, my white doctor's coat brushing against his bare, inked chest. I let my hand hover over the Roman numerals on his abdomen, right where his heart was hammering against his ribs. Your body isn't broken, Cristiano, I whispered. Your trust is. Now let me prove it. The second my palm made contact with his heated skin, I felt his entire frame go rigid. It wasn't just fear. It was a spark. A violent, primal surge of life that he thought had died forever. I was hired to fix a mafia boss. I didn't know that by making him feel again, I was signing my own death warrant. What happens when a healer falls for the monster she's supposed to cure? Stay tuned because this story gets darker and more delicious with every second. Before we dive into how I ended up as the miracle doctor for the Italian underworld, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. You don't want to miss a single heartbeat of this saga. Like this video right now if you believe some rules were made to be broken. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The humid air of Milan felt like a damp blanket as I stepped off the private jet, but it was nothing compared to the sterile hum of the penthouse suite where I now stood. I took a deep breath and checked my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. My natural curls were pinned back into a sharp, professional bun, and my white doctor's coat was pressed to a crisp edge. I looked like a woman who had it all under control. I was a lie. This was it. My first high-stakes private client. I'd flown thousands of miles from Atlanta because a mysterious envelope offered me $750,000 to do the impossible. But as I looked around the room, I realized this wasn't a home. It was a fortress. The elevator doors behind me hissed open, and a man in a tailored black suit stepped out. He didn't look like a nurse or a butler. He looked like a predator. Dr. Morrison? He asked, his eyes scanning me like I was a security threat. That's me, I said, adjusting the strap of my medical bag. I'm Luca. I handle security for Mr. Marino. I should warn you, he didn't want my help and he certainly doesn't want yours. He thinks his mother is wasting her money. I've handled difficult patients before, Luca, I replied, masking the tremor in my voice with a practiced smirk. Luca's mouth twitched, almost a pitying smile. With respect, doctor? You haven't handled anyone like him. He led me down a corridor where the walls seemed to sweat secrets. When he opened the final door, the room was bathed in shadows. Heavy velvet curtains blocked out the Italian sun, leaving only a sliver of light to illuminate the man standing at the window. He was a silhouette of pure, rigid tension. Mr. Marino, I said, keeping my voice professional. I'm Sage Morrison. Your mother hired me because... I know why you are here, he interrupted. His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver straight down my spine. And I am telling you to leave. I flew across the Atlantic to help you, I countered, sitting my bag down with a decisive thump. The least you can do is look at me while you're dismissing me. The silence stretched until I thought the air would shatter. Then slowly he turned. My breath caught in my throat. He was a masterpiece of severe beauty. Sharp angles, dark hair falling over intense eyes, and ink that crawled up his neck like a warning. But it wasn't the tattoos that made me pause. It was the emptiness. He looked like a man who had given up on the very idea of hope. You've looked, he sneered. Now get out. I didn't move. I pulled out my medical journal and flipped through the pages, catching his gaze with a challenge. I know you've seen 12 specialists. I know you've had 3 failed surgeries. And I know you're standing in the dark because you've convinced yourself you're broken beyond repair. I moved closer, invading the space that usually kept people at a distance. Well, Mr. Marino, I'm here to tell you squarely that you're wrong. Give me 1 hour. 1 session. If you don't feel even the slightest change, I'll walk out that door and you'll never see me again. I dropped my gaze to his waistline, my heart hammering against my ribs. But if I can make you feel something, anything, then you owe me an apology. He studied me for an eternity, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of anger and raw curiosity. Finally, he unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the map of scars and Roman numerals across his chest. "One session," he growled. "Then you leave." As he lay on the table, I warmed the massage oil between my palms. The muscles beneath my fingers were like cords of steel, locked tight with years of suppressed rage. "You're holding your breath, Cristiano," I murmured, pressing my palms into the small of his back. "Tension is the enemy of healing. It is hard to relax when a stranger is touching me," he hissed. "I'm not a stranger. I'm your doctor." I moved my hands lower, finding a specific nerve point. "When was the last time anyone actually touched you? Not a doctor poking and prodding, but a real human touch." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The way his body suddenly, grudgingly began to respond to my warmth told me everything I needed to know. I was about to fix the unfixable. But I had no idea that by fixing him I was breaking every rule I'd ever lived by. I knew the rules. Every doctor worth their degree knows that the distance between a physician and a patient is the only thing keeping the treatment objective. But as I stood in the heavy silence of Cristiano Marino's Milan penthouse, the air vibrating with the low hum of the city below, those rules felt like they belonged to a different woman. A woman who wasn't currently staring at the most dangerous man in Italy as he lay half-naked on my table, his body a battlefield of ink and scars. Cristiano's skin was radiating a heat that felt like it was scorching my palms. He had finally stopped fighting my touch, but the tension hadn't left him. It had just shifted. It was no longer the rigidity of a man expecting a blow, but the stillness of a predator waiting for a signal. I moved my hands with clinical precision, tracing the line of his lumbar spine, but my fingers were traitorous. They wanted to linger on the Roman numerals etched into his skin, to memorize the texture of the dark hair that tapered down into the waistband of his trousers. "Your body is a vault, Cristiano," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own thundering pulse. "You've spent 3 years guarding a secret that doesn't belong to you. You're waiting for a betrayal to happen again, so you've shut down the gates." I felt a ripple go through his muscles. He didn't look at me, but his jaw was so tight I feared it might crack. "Betrayal is the only currency in my world, Sage. If you are soft, you are dead. And if you are stone, you are a statue," I countered. I moved my hands to the side of his obliques, digging my thumbs into a pressure point. A statue can't lead an empire. A statue can't feel the sun. And it certainly can't feel the woman standing right in front of him. He turned his head then, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. There was no doctor in his gaze anymore. There was only a man, nakedly honest and terrifyingly hungry. "You think you can just walk in here with your degrees and your American confidence and unlock what 3 years of agony has sealed? I think your body is already answering me," I said, my voice dropping an octave. I moved my hand lower, my fingertips grazing the sensitive skin just above his hip bone. The reaction was instantaneous. A low, guttural groan escaped his throat, and his stomach muscles spasmed under my touch. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It became thick, electric, the kind of tension that precedes a lightning strike. I saw the way his breath caught, the way his pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. For 3 years he had been a ghost. But as my hand lingered on that forbidden boundary, I felt the phantom of a response. A tingle of life in the nerves everyone else had written off as dead. "Wait," he rasped, his hand suddenly shooting out to catch my wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. "What are you doing to me?" "I'm proving you're still alive," I whispered. I didn't pull away. I leaned closer, my white coat brushing against his bare shoulder, the scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and something metallic like rain on hot asphalt, filling my senses. "I told you, Cristiano. Your trust is broken, not your body. You're terrified that if you feel this you'll lose your edge. You're terrified of the surrender." He pulled my hand closer, pressing my palm flat against his heated skin, right over his heart. It was racing, a frantic staccato that mirrored my own. "In my world, surrender is a death sentence." "Then let this be a secret," I murmured, my face so close to his I could feel the heat of his breath on my lips. A secret between the doctor and the ghost. The tension was a physical weight now, pulling us toward each other. I could see the battle raging in his eyes. The Don who needed to control everything versus the man who was starving for the touch of someone who didn't fear him. He sat up slowly, never letting go of my wrist, bringing us eye to eye. In the dim light, the tattoos on his chest seemed to move with every heavy breath he took. "You're playing with fire, Sage," he warned, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. "I'm not a good man. I don't know how to be gentle. If I let you in, I will consume you." "Then let me burn," I challenged. He didn't kiss me. Not yet. But he leaned in until his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. For the first time, the cold, untouchable mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man who was vibrating with a need so raw it was palpable. My hands, usually so steady, were trembling as I reached up to cup his face, my dark skin a stark contrast against his pale, chiseled features. The moment was shattered by a sharp, rhythmic pounding on the heavy oak doors of the suite. Cristiano was back to the dawn in a heartbeat. He let go of me and stood, reaching for his silk shirt in one fluid, predatory motion. "Don Cristiano." Luca's voice muffled through the door, sounding uncharacteristically urgent. "The shipment from the docks. There's a problem. The Russo family is making a move." Cristiano's face hardened into a mask of ice, the vulnerability of the last 10 minutes vanishing behind a wall of cold iron. He didn't look at me as he buttoned his shirt, his movements efficient and lethal. The ghost had returned to his fortress. "We are done for today, Doctor," he said, his voice now as sharp as a blade. "Cristiano, wait," I said, stepping toward him. He stopped, his hand on the door handle, but he didn't turn around. "You've done your job, Sage. You found a spark. But remember where you are. This isn't a hospital. And I am not a patient you can save." He vanished into the hall, leaving me alone in the shadows of the penthouse. My hands were still warm from his skin, and my heart was still screaming for the contact he had just severed. I looked down at the massage table, at the indentation where his body had been, and realized I was in far deeper than I had ever intended. I had come here to heal a man's body. But as I watched the city lights of Milan flicker like 1,000 predatory eyes, I realized that I was the one who was truly at risk. I wasn't just his doctor anymore. I was the only person who knew the Don was vulnerable. And in this world, that secret was a death warrant for both of us. I packed my bag with shaking fingers, the silence of the room now feeling like a threat. I had promised to fix him, to make him feel again. I had succeeded. But as the elevator descended toward the lobby, a chilling thought took root in my mind. I had awakened a monster. And now I was the only thing he wanted to hunt. The first week in Milan felt like a fever dream wrapped in black silk and expensive danger. Every morning I was escorted into the Marino stronghold, past men with cold eyes and bulges beneath their jackets that I knew weren't cell phones. My life had become a series of whispered commands and heavy silences, centered entirely around the man who was currently trying to stonewall me into oblivion. "I'm not here to talk, Sage. I'm here because I was told you were a miracle worker. So far, all I've done is lie on this table while you poke at my memories." Cristiano's voice was like grinding gravel, low and dangerous. He was sitting on the edge of the treatment table, his shirt discarded, looking every bit the fallen angel. The morning sun hit the tattoos on his back, making the ink look like it was moving, a writhing map of his sins. "The body doesn't keep secrets, Cristiano. It stores them," I replied, my voice cool and clinical even as my pulse thrummed in my ears. I snapped on my gloves, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "You can't expect your nervous system to respond when you've spent 3 years telling it to die. We have to address the psychological blockage." "I don't need a therapist. I need a solution," he snapped, standing up and pacing the length of the room with a predatory grace. He looked like a caged beast, one that was starting to realize the bars weren't made of steel, but of his own shame. I watched him, and for a second I saw a flicker of the man behind the Don. I saw the shadow of the night that had shattered him. He didn't know I knew. He didn't know I'd seen the reports. 3 years ago he'd walked into his own bedroom and found the two people he trusted most, his fiancée Isabella and his own brother Dante, wrapped in each other's arms. The betrayal hadn't just broken his heart. It had severed the connection between his mind and his masculinity. In his world, a man who couldn't perform was a man who couldn't lead. It was a weakness that smelled like blood to his enemies, and the shame of it had become a parasite, eating him from the inside out. "Sit down, Mr. Marino," I said, my tone brooking no argument. It was a gamble speaking to him like that, but I realized early on that Cristiano didn't respect submissiveness. He respected power. He stopped, his dark eyes flashing with a mix of fury and intrigue. Slowly he returned to the table and sat. I stepped into his space, the scent of him, expensive tobacco and bitter orange, swirling around me. I began the physical examination, my fingers moving over his shoulders, feeling the knots of tension that felt like iron cables. "Tell me about these," I murmured, my hand tracing a jagged white scar that cut through the ink on his ribs. "A knife in a back alley in Rome. I was 19, he said flatly. "And this one?" I moved my hand to a burn mark on his shoulder. A reminder that fire doesn't discriminate. He let out a harsh, dry laugh. "You're looking for trauma, Dotteressa? You won't find it in a few scars. You don't know my world. You don't know what it's like to breathe in the dark every single day. I know that your world is written all over your body," I countered, my voice dropping to a whisper. I moved my hand to the center of his chest, my fingertips grazing the intricate Sacred Heart tattooed directly over his own. "You think this ink is a decoration? It's not. It's armor. You've turned your skin into a fortress because you're terrified of what will happen if someone actually touches the man underneath." Cristiano went dead still. The mask of the ruthless mafia boss slipped just a fraction, and for the first time, I saw the raw, bleeding vulnerability of a man who had been discarded by the people he loved. I didn't look away. I traced the outline of the Sacred Heart, my touch light, almost a caress. "Isabella didn't just take your pride, Cristiano," I said softly. "She took your permission to feel. And you're letting her keep it." A low growl vibrated in his chest, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into my touch, his forehead dropping to rest against my shoulder. The physical proximity was electric. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the sheer masculine power of him contained in a frame that was currently trembling with suppressed emotion. I shifted my hand, moving it down his abdomen, my fingers following the ridge of his muscles. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs I was sure he could hear it. This was the line. The professional boundary I had sworn to maintain was dissolving in the heat of his presence. I reached the lower pelvic region where the nerve stimulation was most crucial. I applied a firm, rhythmic pressure, my eyes never leaving his face. "Cristiano," I whispered. "Breathe." He let out a jagged exhale, his eyes snapping open. They were dark, clouded with a sudden, overwhelming heat. I felt a microscopic shift beneath my fingers. The faintest, most primal stir of life. It was a breakthrough. A minor one, but in 3 years of dead silence, it was a thunderclap. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stared at me, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The arrogance was gone. The coldness was gone. There was only a man looking at his savior with a desperation that broke my heart. I felt a spark," he rasped, his Italian accent thick and heavy. "Sage. I haven't felt anything in 3 years. Not a flicker. Not a goddamn thing." The air in the room was suddenly too thin. The medical nature of the session had vanished, replaced by an intimacy so raw it felt like we were both standing naked in the center of the room. I was no longer just a doctor and he was no longer just a patient. We were two people caught in a gravitational pull that neither of us could fight. He reached up, his large tattooed hand catching mine. He didn't pull it away from his body. Instead, he pressed it firmer against his skin, guiding my palm to the heat of his core. His grip was firm, his eyes searching mine as if I were the only fixed point in a world that had suddenly started spinning. "Don't let go," he whispered, his voice a broken plea. "Please, don't let go." My breath hitched in my throat. The professional in me was screaming to pull back, to re-establish the distance, to remember that I was an employee and he was a dangerous man with a body count. But the woman in me was already gone. His touch ignited a fire in my blood that I hadn't known existed. It wasn't just a clinical reaction. It was a soul-deep recognition. As I stood there, my hand held captive against the rising heat of his body, I realized that the walls of stone weren't just around his heart. They were around mine too. And they were starting to crumble. His touch didn't just feel like a patient seeking help. It felt like a claim. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. broken only by the synchronized rhythm of our breathing. I looked at our joined hands, my dark skin against his pale ink-covered wrist, and I knew there was no going back. I had come to Milan to fix a man's broken masculinity, but I was beginning to realize that I might be the one who ended up truly undone. Cristiano pulled me an inch closer, his gaze dropping to my lips, and the tension between us became a living, breathing thing. I could feel the danger, the forbidden nature of what was happening, but for the first time in my life I didn't want to be safe. I wanted to feel the fire. I was his doctor. He was my patient. And we were both about to burn the world down just to stay in this moment. The air in the penthouse was different after that morning. The clinical silence had been replaced by a heavy magnetic pull that made it impossible to breathe whenever we were in the same room. By the time the sun began to dip below the Milanese skyline, painting the marble floors in shades of bruised purple and gold, I knew I couldn't stay trapped in that sterile suite. I needed to see the man in his element, and he, surprisingly, seemed to need to show me. "You said you needed to understand my life context, Dottoressa," Cristiano said, his voice a low vibration near my ear as he led me toward the private elevator. He had traded his silk shirt for a black cashmere sweater that made him look less like a patient and more like the shadow king he was. "Tonight I will show you the Milan they don't put on postcards." We didn't go to the glittering plazas. We went deep into the Navigli district, where the canals reflected the amber glow of ancient street lamps. We sat in a corner of a tiny family-owned trattoria where the owner bowed low to Cristiano, not out of fear but out of a deep historical respect. "Tell me," he said, leaning across the small wooden table. The candlelight danced in his dark eyes, catching the edge of the ink that climbed his neck. "What made a woman from Atlanta come all this way to fix a man like me?" I looked at the wine in my glass, the red liquid dark as blood. "I grew up watching my mother become a fortress. My father walked out when I was 6, and she decided right then that no one would ever have the power to hurt her again. I learned early that control is the only thing that keeps you safe. I became a doctor because I wanted to be the one holding the scalpel, the one with the answers. If I'm the healer, I'm never the one who's hurting." Cristiano reached out, his thumb grazing the back of my hand. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "We are the same, Sage. We use our power as a cage. We think if we build the walls high enough, the ghosts can't get in. But they're already inside, aren't they?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he took me back to the penthouse, but the professional distance was gone. We ended up in his kitchen, a sprawling space of dark stone and stainless steel. He insisted on making risotto, his movements fluid and surprisingly domestic. I countered by trying to show him how to season the shrimp I'd found in his fridge with a blend of spices from home. "You're burning my risotto," he laughed, a genuine deep sound that transformed his face, erasing the hard lines of the dawn for a fleeting second. "And you're drowning my gumbo," I shot back, a smile tugging at my lips. The laughter died down, replaced by a sudden, sharp silence. We were standing inches apart in the warm kitchen, the smell of garlic and saffron heavy in the air. I looked up at him, seeing the way his gaze dropped to my mouth. He moved closer, his hand coming up to tuck a loose curl behind my ear. His fingers lingered on my skin, warm and calloused. "I haven't laughed like that in a long time," he murmured. "Sage, you're dangerous. You make me want things I haven't dared to think about in years." He leaned in, his lips a breath away from mine, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. But before the distance could vanish, the heavy thud of the penthouse door echoed through the suite. Luca appeared, his face grim, his eyes darting to us before settling on his boss. "Don Cristiano. It's the Russos. They've moved on the warehouse. We need you." The warmth in Cristiano's eyes vanished instantly. The man I had just shared a meal with was gone, replaced by the ruthless leader of the Marino family. He grabbed a heavy coat, and for the first time I saw him check a weapon tucked into his waistband. "Stay here," he commanded. It wasn't a request. I watched him go, and 2 hours later I watched him return. He didn't see me standing in the shadows of the hallway. He looked tired, his knuckles bloodied, his expression cold as ice. I saw the darkness in him then, the brutality required to rule a city's underworld. It should have repelled me. It should have sent me running for the airport. But when he finally saw me, he stopped. He didn't hide the blood or the anger. He just looked at me with a raw, agonizing vulnerability. "This is who I am, Sage," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the world you're trying to heal. You shouldn't be here. I walked toward him, not stopping until I was right in his space. I took his bloodied hand in mine, my touch steady despite the fear humming in my veins. I'm not afraid of your darkness, Cristiano. I'm afraid of the man who thinks he has to face it alone. I led him back to the treatment room, the clinical setting now feeling like a sanctuary. I didn't reach for my medical bag. I reached for him. I began to work on his shoulders, my touch deeper, more personal than it had ever been. I felt the way his body responded, not just a clinical reflex but a soul-deep surrender. The physical improvement was undeniable, fueled by the emotional intimacy of the night. You make me feel dangerous, he whispered, his eyes closing as my hands moved over his skin. Like I could lose control. Like I want to let you take it from me. He caught my hand, pulling me around to face him. He didn't let go. His grip was a tether, a silent plea for me to stay in the storm with him. Don't leave tomorrow, he said, his gaze searching mine. I knew the professional distance was gone. I knew that by staying I was crossing a line I could never uncross. His touch ignited a fire in me that made my ethical walls feel like tissue paper. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. As I looked into his dark, searching eyes, I realized the cliffhanger wasn't just about his recovery. It was about me. For the first time in my life I was losing control, and the terrifying part was that I didn't want it back. The rain began as a low rhythmic hum against the penthouse glass, but within an hour, it had evolved into a violent Milanese storm. Thunder rattled the floorboards beneath my feet, mirroring the turbulent energy that had been building between Cristiano and me for 8 long weeks. The power flickered once, twice, and then plunged the world into absolute darkness. I stood in the center of the treatment room, my breath hitching as the only light now came from the flickering emergency candles I had lit moments before. The golden glow danced over the shadows, catching the sharp angles of Cristiano's face as he emerged from the darkness. He had discarded his shirt, his chest heaving, his tattoos looking like living shadows in the candlelight. The air was thick, charged with the kind of electricity that happens right before a total collapse. The storm is getting worse, I whispered, my voice trembling. The storm isn't outside, Sage, he rasped, his voice a low, predatory growl. He crossed the room, the distance between us evaporating until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I can't pretend anymore. I can't lie on that table and let you touch me like I'm just a piece of broken machinery. He reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip. The contact was a match to a fuse. I need to know if this is real. Or am I just another case to you? Another trauma to be filed away. You were never just a case, I confessed, my professional armor finally shattering. He didn't wait for another word. He crashed his lips against mine, a kiss that was 3 years of repressed hunger and 8 weeks of agonizing restraint. It was desperate, raw, and tasted of the fine scotch he'd been drinking. I reached up, my fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer as the world outside vanished. We moved toward the bed, the shadows stretching long against the walls. But as things intensified, I felt him go rigid. The familiar shadow of shame flickered in his eyes. His body, so ready a moment ago, faltered. The psychological ghost of Isabella's betrayal had returned to haunt the room. Cristiano pulled back, his face a mask of agony. See? I'm a monster. I'm broken, Sage. Even with you, I can't. He turned to walk away, but I wasn't the same woman who had arrived in Milan. I stepped behind him, my hands sliding over the intricate ink on his back, my forehead resting against his spine. Wait, I whispered. You're still trying to control the outcome, Cristiano. You're fighting yourself because you think your worth is tied to your performance. But I don't want a Don. I don't want a boss. I just want you. I guided him back to the bed, not for sex but for something far more intimate. I held him in the candlelight, my dark skin a beautiful contrast against his, as the walls he had built around his heart finally began to crumble. She said I was a monster, he confessed, his voice breaking for the first time. Isabella. She told me I was cold. That I couldn't feel anything, so why should she stay? I believed her. I shut down because it was easier than feeling the hole she left. I shut down too, I admitted, my voice a soft echo in the dark. I watched love destroy my mother. I promised myself I'd never let a man have enough power to break me. I used my medical degree as a shield so I wouldn't have to be vulnerable. But here I am, and I've never been more terrified. The confession changed the air. The shame that had been holding him hostage began to dissolve, replaced by a raw, profound trust. For the first time he wasn't trying to perform, he was just being. And in that surrender the miracle happened. Without the pressure, without the fear, his body responded to the quiet, tender rhythm of our connection. "Sage," he whispered, his eyes meeting mine with a clarity I hadn't seen before. "Sei la mia salvezza. You are my salvation." We didn't cross the final line that night, not yet. We stayed in the sanctuary of each other's arms as the storm raged outside, our hearts beating in a synchronized rhythm that no medical textbook could explain. But as the first light of dawn began to gray the Milanese sky, I felt the shift. His body was responding naturally now, a physical manifestation of the emotional vault I had finally unlocked. I lay there watching him sleep and the weight of the situation hit me. I had crossed the line from healer to lover. I had given my heart to a man who lived by the sword. As I felt his hand tighten around mine in his sleep, a single thought kept me awake. Morning was coming. And with the light we would have to decide if we were still doctor and patient or if we were something far more dangerous. The morning light was a cold, unforgiving gray as it spilled across the rumpled sheets of Cristiano's bed. I watched the dust motes dancing in a single beam of light, my heart doing a slow, heavy roll in my chest. Beside me, Cristiano stirred, his large hand still possessively draped over my waist. The heat of him was a physical reminder of the vulnerability we'd shared in the dark, but as my clinical brain switched back on, a wave of pure panic washed over me. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep and a tenderness that made me want to weep. "I have to go," I said, sitting up abruptly and pulling the sheet to my chest. "Cristiano, last night, the cuddling, the talking, it was a breach of every professional ethic I have. I'm your doctor. This is wrong." He sat up, his dark hair messy, his tattoos stark against his pale skin. The soft man from the storm was gone, replaced by a Dawn who didn't like being told no. "Last night was the first time I felt human in 3 years, Sage. Don't call it a breach. Call it the cure." "It's not that simple," I snapped, standing up and reaching for my discarded white coat. It felt like a suit of armor I no longer deserved to wear. If the treatment worked, and it clearly did, then my job here is finished. My contract is fulfilled. I should book a flight back to Atlanta. Cristiano was off the bed in a heartbeat, crossing the room with a predatory speed that made my breath hitch. He didn't touch me, but he hovered just inches away, his presence a physical weight. "You think you can just fix the machine and walk away? This was never about the medicine, Sage, and you know it." "Then what was it about?" I challenged, my voice rising. "Was it about the $750,000? Or the thrill of the forbidden? I'm a doctor, Cristiano. I don't do mafia, girlfriend." "It was about this," he roared, grabbing my waist and pulling me flush against him. The argument died in a collision of lips. It was a fierce, desperate makeup kiss that tasted of fear and undeniable possession. All the words, all the ethics, and all the logical reasons why this was a disaster vanished. My hands found the corded muscles of his back and his found the buttons of my shirt. This time there was no shame. No psychological ghosts. The treatment was over, and the passion that took its place was raw, all-consuming, and absolute. As we moved back to the bed, the lines weren't just blurred. They were incinerated. Every touch was a confession, every groan a surrender. For the first time I felt the full power of the man I had healed, and it was devastatingly beautiful. Afterward, as the silence returned to the penthouse, the reality of what we'd done settled between us like a thick fog. I lay in the crook of his arm, staring at the ceiling. "I broke every rule," I whispered, the weight of my lost career hitting me. "For what? A fantasy that ends the moment I step outside this door." "This isn't a fantasy," Cristiano said, his voice low and firm. He turned to face me, his dark eyes more serious than I'd ever seen them. "Sage, I'm falling in love with you. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about the professional boundaries. I want you to stay." My heart soared for a second before the walls of my own trauma slammed back up. "Love makes you weak. Control keeps you safe. Love isn't real, Cristiano. It's proximity. It's chemistry. It's trauma bonding because I'm the only one who knows your secret. Is that what you really believe?" He asked, hurt flashing through his eyes before being replaced by a cold, familiar hardness. "I believe I have to go," I said, my voice shaking. I stood up and began packing my medical bag with trembling hands. The Don is healed. The doctor is done. I didn't look back as I walked toward the elevator. I had fulfilled my mission. I had given him back his life. But as the elevator doors hissed shut, leaving Cristiano standing in the center of the penthouse, I felt a hollow ache in my chest that no medical degree could explain. I had already booked my flight. I had 24 hours to get out of Milan before my heart convinced me to stay. But as I walked out into the busy Italian street, I realized I wasn't just leaving a patient behind. I was leaving the only man who had ever truly seen me. The sound of my suitcase wheels clicking against the polished marble of Malpensa Airport felt like a countdown to my own execution. I had my passport in one hand and a one-way ticket to Atlanta in the other. I told myself I was being smart. I was protecting my license, my heart, and my life. But the air in the terminal felt thin, like I was gasping for oxygen I'd left behind in a penthouse in the city center. I reached the gate, the overhead speakers blurring into a hum of Italian and English, when the atmosphere around me shifted. It wasn't a sound but a feeling, the way the hair on my neck stood up when a predator entered the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Cristiano was there, still dressed in the black suit from that morning, looking every bit the dangerous sovereign of Milan. His eyes were locked on mine, ignoring the gasps and the frantic whispers of the travelers who recognized the Marino crest on the lapel of his coat. He didn't stop until he was inches from me, his presence a wall of heat and iron. "You're leaving without saying goodbye, Dottoressa?" His voice was low, vibrating with a hurt he couldn't quite mask behind his authority. "I said what I needed to say, Cristiano," I whispered, clutching my boarding pass so hard the paper crumpled. "The treatment is over. You're whole. You don't need me anymore. You think I'm standing here because I need a nurse?" He took a step closer, his hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, his thumb tracing the racing pulse beneath my ear. "I don't need a doctor to fix my body anymore, Sage. I need the woman who made me want to use it. I'm not asking you to stay as an employee. I'm asking you to stay because without you, this city is just a graveyard of stone." The terminal fell away. The boarding calls, the bustling tourists, they all vanished. It was just us. "I'm terrified, Cristiano," I confessed, my voice breaking. "Your world is built on blood. My world is built on healing. We're trauma bonded by a secret that could get us both killed." "Then let's find out if it's more than that," he said, his forehead dropping to rest against mine. "Stay. Not as my doctor. As my partner. Let me show you that love doesn't have to be a cage." I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had been so empty weeks ago, and saw a fire that burned only for me. I let my boarding pass fall to the floor. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll stay." The next few weeks were a dream. We existed in a bubble of luxury and newfound passion. We went to hidden trattorias where we held hands under the table, explored the Gothic spires of the Duomo, and spent nights tangled in silk sheets where the only language we spoke was the one our bodies had finally mastered. I was learning the man behind the Don, the one who liked his espresso bitter, who had a dry, wicked sense of humor, and who looked at me like I was the sun itself. But in the shadows of Milan, a ghost was stirring. Isabella stood in the darkened corner of a high-end gallery opening, watching us. I didn't see her at first, but I felt the shift in Cristiano. His body went rigid, the warmth in his eyes vanishing as they fixed on a woman draped in red silk across the room. She was breathtaking, pale, elegant, and sharp as a diamond. She didn't approach us. She just smiled, a slow, predatory curve of the lips that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Who is that?" I asked, my heart sinking as I already knew the answer. "The past," Cristiano muttered, his grip on my hand tightening until it almost hurt. "Stay close to me, Sage." That night the bubble burst. While Cristiano was locked in a late-night meeting with Luca, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A single image appeared on the screen. A photo of me and Cristiano at the airport, my suitcase abandoned on the floor. Beneath it, a message. "A doctor who cures with her bed is no doctor at all." How much did he pay for the miracle, Sage? Or was the $750,000 just the down payment on your dignity? My stomach turned to ice. It was Isabella. She wasn't just back, she was hunting. I walked into the hallway heading for Cristiano's office, when I heard his voice through the heavy oak doors. It was cold. The voice of the man who ruled the underworld. "She called me Luca," Cristiano was saying. Isabella wants a meeting. She claims she has information on the Russo family's next move. It's a trap, Dawn, Luca's voice replied. She knows about the American. She's going to use her. Let her try, Cristiano growled. I'll meet her at the cafe in the Brera district tomorrow. I need to know how much she knows about Sage's involvement in my private matters. I stood in the hallway, my hand trembling as I gripped the wall. He was going to meet her. The woman who had shattered his soul. The woman who knew the secret of his dysfunction. The next morning the penthouse felt like a tomb. Cristiano was distant, his mind clearly on the encounter to come. He kissed my forehead before leaving, promising to be back by lunch, but he didn't look me in the eye. I couldn't just sit there. I followed them. I sat in a small rental car 3 blocks away, watching through the window of a sun-drenched cafe as Cristiano sat across from Isabella. From this distance they looked like the perfect Italian power couple. She was leaning in, her hand reaching out to touch his arm, her face a mask of regret and longing. I watched Cristiano's face. He didn't pull away immediately. He looked haunted. Back at the cafe, Isabella leaned closer to his ear. They call her the miracle nurse, Cristiano, she whispered, her voice carrying a venomous sweetness even as she smiled for the public. But we both know the truth. You were broken and you paid a little black girl from the States to play with your ego until it worked again. How does it feel, knowing your empire is built on a lie that a $750,000 paycheck bought? Leave her out of this, Isabella, Cristiano hissed, his knuckles white as he gripped the table. Oh, I'll do more than that, she purred, leaning back and taking a sip of her espresso. I'll expose her. I'll make sure every medical board in the world knows that Dr. Sage Morrison treats her patients between the sheets. And then I'll tell the families. I'll tell the Russos that the great Cristiano Marino was so weak he needed a foreign girl to make him a man again. You'll be dead by sunset and she'll be in a prison cell, if she's lucky. She stood up, smoothing her dress. Come back to me, Cristiano. Reclaim your seat at the head of the table with a woman who actually belongs there. Or watch as I burn your miracle to the ground. Cristiano returned to the penthouse an hour later, his face a mask of repressed violence. He found me standing by the window, my phone in my hand, the screen still glowing with Isabella's threatening message. You met her, I said, my voice flat. I had to know the threat, he replied, crossing the room to me. Sage, she's insane. She's going to try to ruin you. She already has, I said, showing him the screen. She sent this to me, Cristiano. She knows about the money. She knows about the treatment. She knows everything. I won't let her hurt you, he promised, reaching for me, but I stepped back. The old fear, the one I'd learned from my mother, was screaming in my ear. Love makes you a target. Vulnerability is a death sentence. Can you stop her? I asked. Can you stop her from telling the world that I'm a fraud? That I sold my ethics for a mafia boss? Cristiano didn't answer. For the first time I saw a flicker of the old doubt in his eyes. The ghost of Isabella's betrayal was back, and this time, it wasn't just in his head. It was standing in the middle of our lives with a torch in her hand. That night as we lay in bed, the air was cold. For the first time since the storm, he didn't touch me. And as I stared at the Roman numerals on his chest in the moonlight, I realized the ghost hadn't just returned to reclaim him. She had come to remind us that in the mafia, even a miracle comes with a body count. The Brera district meeting with Isabella had left a lingering poison in the penthouse air. For 3 years, Cristiano had lived in a fortress of his own making, but Isabella had found the one crack in the armor. Me. As I stood in the kitchen the following evening, the silence was so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Cristiano was at the far end of the marble island, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his eyes fixed on the city lights with a haunting vacancy. You're thinking about what she said, I murmured, stepping closer. About me being an obstacle. He didn't turn. His posture was too rigid, his shoulders pulled tight in a way that reminded me of the first day I met him. She's right about one thing, Sage. My world is a disease. And I've infected you with it. I made my own choice, Cristiano, I said, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched. It was a small movement, a microscopic pull away, but it felt like a slap. My hand hovered in the air, cold and empty. I looked at him, really looked at him, and my heart sank. The confidence, the virility, the spark we had fought so hard to ignite. It was flickering. Isabella hadn't just threatened our reputation. She had reimplanted the seed of his trauma. "Don't," he rasped, finally looking at me. His eyes were clouded, the dark pupils swallowed by a familiar, crushing shame. "Every time you touch me now, I hear her voice. I hear her telling me that I paid for you. That I'm only a man because of a bank transfer. That's a lie and you know it," I said, my voice rising with a mix of fear and desperation. "Is it?" He slammed the glass down on the counter. "Because tonight when I looked at you I felt nothing. Just the ice. Just the same goddamn wall." The realization hit me like a physical blow. He was relapsing. The psychological trauma of Isabella's presence was so potent it was overriding the physical progress we'd made. The Don was retreating back into his stone fortress, and this time he was pulling the drawbridge up behind him. I tried to bridge the gap, to use the techniques we'd practiced, but he was gone. He spent the night on the sofa, and the next morning he wouldn't even look at me. The clinical distance hadn't just returned. It had become a chasm. By that afternoon the situation escalated. Luca arrived with news that rival families were whispering about the Don's distraction. They were sensing the shift in his energy, the lack of the predatory focus that kept them in line. Isabella was successfully painting me as the source of his weakness. I was sitting in the library trying to focus on a medical journal when Cristiano walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept, his hair disheveled, his jaw shadowed by dark stubble. "You need to go, Sage," he said, his voice flat. "I've arranged for a car to take you to a safe house near Lake Como. From there, Luca will get you to Switzerland." "I'm not leaving you like this," I said, standing up. "You don't understand," he roared, the sound echoing off the book-lined walls. "If you stay, you're a target. And if I'm like this, I can't protect you. He's one, Sage. She's inside my head and I can't get her out." "Then let me help you get her out." I crossed the room, invading his space, forcing him to acknowledge me. "Cristiano, look at me. Not the Don, not the boss. Look at Sage." I reached up, my hands framing his face. He tried to pull away, his eyes darting around as if he were looking for an exit, but I held on. I could feel the tremors running through him. "She is the past," I whispered. "She is the betrayal. But I am the present. I am the woman who chose to stay when she knew exactly what you were. Don't let her take this from us." "I'm broken again," he whispered, a single agonizing tear escaping and tracing a path over the ink on his cheek. "I can feel the deadness returning. It's like my blood is turning to lead." "It's just fear," I said, my own voice breaking. "And fear only wins if you let it." I kissed him then, not a kiss of passion but a kiss of war. It was a desperate, grounding contact, a reminder of the life we had built in the storm. For a second I felt him respond, a tiny spark of the man who had called me his salvation. But then he pulled back, his face a mask of cold, agonizing resolve. "I can't do this, Sage. Every time I look at you I see the ruin she's going to bring down on your head. I'd rather you hate me and be alive than love me and be dead." He walked out, locking the library door from the outside. I was a prisoner in the penthouse. My lover had become my jailer, convinced that his own brokenness was a death sentence for me. As I listened to the sounds of him barking orders to Luca in the hallway, I realized that the medical treatment was officially over. This wasn't a case of nerve damage or psychological blockage anymore. This was a battle for his soul. I sat on the floor against the locked door, the golden Italian sun setting behind the Duomo, and I made a promise to the silence. I wouldn't leave. I wouldn't let Isabella win. If he wanted to go back into the dark, he was going to have to drag me with him. But as the night deepened and the sounds of the mafia world hummed with a renewed predatory intensity outside the windows, a terrifying question haunted me. Can a healer fix a man who has decided he's already dead? The silence of the locked library was a living thing, a cold, suffocating weight that felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. I had spent hours pacing the perimeter of my gilded cage, my heels clicking against the mahogany floor until I finally collapsed against the door. On the other side, I could hear the muffled, frantic energy of the Marino organization. The Don was preparing for war, but the man I loved was retreating into a fortress of ice. "Cristiano!" I screamed, pounding my fists against the wood until my skin bruised. "Open this door. You are letting her win." There was no answer. Only the ghost of his footsteps fading down the hallway. The dark night of the soul isn't just a metaphor. It's a physical reality when you realize the person you've tethered your life to is slipping into an abyss. I crawled to the window, watching the Milanese moon hang like a jagged bone over the city. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. For the first time I questioned everything. Was I just a fool? A girl from Atlanta who thought she could tame a hurricane with a medical degree? Maybe Isabel was right. Maybe I was just an expensive distraction, a temporary bandage on a wound that went all the way to the bone. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the only person who had ever seen me without my armor. Mom. My voice broke the moment she picked up. Sage? Baby, what's wrong? You sound like you're 1,000 miles under the sea. I'm in over my head, Mom. I'm in love with someone who is trying to save me by destroying himself. He thinks he's broken and I don't know if I can fix him again. There was a long pause on the other end, the familiar sounds of a southern night humming through the receiver. Sage, listen to me. Love isn't about never falling. You taught me that when you went over there. You said you wanted to heal what was untreatable. Well, baby, the hardest thing to heal isn't a heart that stopped beating. It's a heart that stopped believing. You can't fix him with a scalpel or a lecture. You have to decide if you're brave enough to be the person who catches him when he hits the bottom. But he's locked me out, I whispered. Then find another way in. You're a Morrison woman. We don't wait for doors to open, we build our own. I hung up, a cold, hard clarity settling in my gut. I didn't need a key. I needed to remind him that he wasn't the only one with something to lose. I spent the next hour working. I didn't use medical tools. I used the truth. I found the hidden safe in the library, the one Cristiano thought I didn't know about, and I pulled out the files he'd kept on the Russo family and Isabella. I saw the trap she was setting. The gala was tomorrow night, a public charity event where she intended to humiliate him, to reveal his weakness, and force a reconciliation that would consolidate her power. I wasn't going to Lake Como. And I wasn't going to Switzerland. I managed to pick the lock with a surgical probe from my bag, a skill I'd never planned on using but was grateful for now. I slipped out of the library and moved like a shadow through the penthouse. I found Cristiano in his private gym, the lights dimmed to a brutal red. He was hitting a heavy bag with a ferocity that was borderline suicidal. His knuckles were shredded, blood splattering the floor with every impact. He was trying to kill the numbness. Get out, Sage, he gasped, not even turning around. I told Luca to take you. Luca works for the Dawn, I said, stepping into the red light. But I don't. He stopped, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his chin. He turned and the sight of him nearly broke me. He looked shattered. The power, the command, it was all gone, replaced by a raw, naked agony. I can't feel it, Sage, he choked out, looking down at his hands. The ice. It's everywhere. I look at you and I feel the shame of every lie Isabella told. I'm a ghost again. Then let me be your anchor, I said, crossing the room. I didn't stop until I was right in his face. I took his bloodied hands and pressed them against my cheeks. You think you're protecting me by pushing me away? You're just making it easier for them to kill us both. Isabella wants the Dawn because she wants the throne. I want Cristiano because I want the man. I am nothing without the power, he whispered. You are everything to me, I countered. I reached up and pulled his head down, my lips meeting his in a kiss that was a collision of desperation and defiance. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't soft. It was a battle. I poured every ounce of my love, my fear, and my strength into that contact. I felt him fight it. I felt the rigidity of his muscles, the wall of stone he'd built. But I didn't let go. I bit his lip until I tasted his blood, forcing him to feel something, anything other than the numbness. And then it happened. A low, guttural sob broke from his throat. He collapsed to his knees, pulling me down with him. The Dawn was gone. The boss was gone. There was only a man crying into the crook of my neck, his hands clutching my hair like I was the only thing keeping him from drifting into the void. I'm so afraid, he confessed, the words muffled against my skin. I'm afraid that if I let her win, I lose you. And if I fight her, I destroy you. We fight her together, I said, rocking him in the red light. We go to that gala tomorrow. We don't hide the miracle, Cristiano. We weaponize it. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The coldness didn't vanish, but it transformed. The fire was back, but it wasn't the wild, destructive flame of earlier. It was a steady, lethal heat. He pulled back, his eyes finally clearing, the dark pupils focusing on me with a terrifyingly beautiful intensity. You realize what you're asking? he asked, his voice returning to that low, dangerous velvet. If we go there and show them who we are, there is no turning back. You will be the queen of the Marino family. Every enemy I have will become yours. I've been a doctor in the inner city of Atlanta, Cristiano. I've looked death in the eye more times than you can count. I'm not afraid of your enemies. I'm only afraid of a life without you. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. For the first time in days, his touch was steady. The connection was back, humming between us like a high-tension wire. Tonight, he whispered, I don't want to be the dawn. I don't even want to be healed. I just want to be yours. We didn't go back to the bedroom. We made love right there on the gym floor, under the brutal red lights, a frantic primal reconnection that served as our final oath. Every touch was a seal, every breath a promise. I felt the full physical response of his body, not as a medical breakthrough, but as a total surrender to the trust we had rebuilt in the dark. As we lay there afterward, the Milanese storm finally breaking outside, Cristiano looked at me with a lethal smile. Tomorrow, Isabella thinks she is going to announce my surrender, he said, his hand sliding possessively over my hip. She has no idea she's actually invited her own executioner. I looked at the scars and the ink on his chest and knew the dark night was over. But as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, I knew the real war was just beginning. We were going into the lion's den, and the only thing we had to protect us was the love they all thought was our greatest weakness. The air inside the Palazzo Marino was thick with the scent of gardenias and expensive betrayal. Milan's elite moved like sharks in silk, their eyes darting toward the empty throne at the head of the ballroom. Isabella was already there, a vision in blood-red lace, holding a microphone like a scepter. She looked triumphant, a woman who believed she had successfully strangled a miracle in its crib. Tonight, Isabella's voice amplified through the speakers, dripping with a manufactured sweetness, we celebrate the return of our leader. We celebrate the end of a difficult chapter. Cristiano has realized that some wounds can only be healed by those who truly belong in his world. A hush fell over the crowd. The Russo family representatives smirked. They were waiting for the Don to walk out with his head bowed, a broken man returning to his toxic past. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom exploded open. The room didn't just go silent, it stopped breathing. Cristiano didn't walk in like a man defeated. He walked in like a god reclaimed. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it was forged from shadows, his posture so rigid and powerful it radiated a physical heat. And I was on his arm. I had traded my white coat for a gown of shimmering midnight silk that hugged every curve, my hair cascading in dark waves that caught the light of 1,000 chandeliers. I wasn't the miracle nurse anymore. I was the woman who had walked through the fire and come out holding the flame. Cristiano didn't even look at the crowd. His eyes were fixed on Isabella. He stepped onto the stage, the sheer force of his presence pushing her back. He didn't wait for an invitation. He took the microphone from her hand, his fingers grazing hers with a coldness that made her flinch. Isabella is right about one thing, Cristiano's voice rumbled, deeper and more lethal than I'd ever heard it. I was broken. I spent 3 years in a prison of my own shame, convinced by a liar that I was a monster who didn't deserve to feel. He turned, his gaze finding mine in the crowd. The raw, unfiltered passion in his eyes made my breath hitch. But then a woman came into my life who didn't care about my title or my sins. Sage Morrison didn't just heal my body. She reminded me that true power doesn't come from control. It comes from the courage to surrender to the person who sees your soul. The silence was deafening. Isabella's face turned a sickly shade of gray as Cristiano stepped off the stage and walked straight toward me. He didn't care about the cameras or the rival families. He reached out, his tattooed hand cupping my cheek, his thumb tracing my lower lip in a gesture of such intimate possession that a collective gasp went through the room. You wanted to see the miracle? Cristiano growled, his voice loud enough for every shark in the room to hear. Here she is. My healer. My queen. And if any of you think my love for her is a weakness. He looked around the room, his eyes promising a violence that made the Russo family back away. Come and try me. He pulled me into a kiss that wasn't for the cameras. It was for us. It was hot, desperate, and tasted of a victory that had been paid for in blood and tears. In that moment the physical healing was complete. I could feel the life in him, The absolute virility of a man who was no longer afraid to feel. As we broke apart, the room erupted into chaos. Isabella was escorted out by Luca, her screams of rage lost in the roar of the crowd. But Cristiano didn't look back. He leaned into my ear, his breath hot against my skin. "Let's get out of here," he whispered. "I have a lifetime of feeling to make up for." 1 year later, the sun was setting over the Marino estate. I stood on the terrace, my hand resting on the swell of my stomach. The miracle hadn't just healed a man. It had created a new life. Cristiano stepped out behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his hands joining mine over our unborn child. He was no longer the Don who lived in the dark. He was a man who had found his light. "Wait," he whispered, his voice thick with a tenderness that still made my heart skip. "Let me feel it." He pressed his palm against the soft movement of the baby, his forehead resting against mine. "Every heartbeat, Sage. Every moment. For the rest of our lives." I closed my eyes, leaning into him. We had survived the ghosts. We had built an empire on a foundation of trust. But as a black sedan pulled up the long driveway, and Luca stepped out with a look of grim urgency, I knew the peace was only a temporary sanctuary. "Don Cristiano," Luca called out, his voice tight. "The Russos didn't forget. And they aren't coming for the throne this time. They're coming for the doctor." Cristiano's grip on me tightened, his eyes flashing with a renewed, lethal fire. The story of our healing was over, but the war to protect it? That was just beginning. Now the Don has reclaimed his throne, but the Russo family just put a price on the only woman who can keep him whole. Is Sage ready to trade her stethoscope for a Beretta? Or will the secrets of the Marino family tear them apart before the first shot is fired? I know you're as breathless as I am, besties. If you need to know how Sage survives the Russos' hitmen, you must be here for what happens next. Before you go, subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the moment the next part drops. Smash that like button if Cristiano's public declaration gave you chills. Comment Team Sage if you think she's strong enough for the mafia world, or Team Cristiano if you think he should have sent her away to keep her safe. I'll be in the comments reading all your theories. See you in my next one. Bye.